Hello, good afternoon. This is Dmitry Sitkovetsky with my Q&A of the program that's called Transformation, Art of Reinvention in the Time of the Pandemic. Today we have two very distinguished guests, also very dear friends. It's Jessica Ford and Roger Vignoles. They're wonderful professionals in this field. Roger, of course, is very, very well known in the world of music as one of the most fantastic pianists, playing with great singers of our time and instrumentalists. And Jessica, of course, been the top agent of the agencies like Intermusica and IMG Artists before. So welcome, Roger and Jessica. Wonderful to have
you. Thank you, Dima.
Great. So the first question has traditionally now become this one. You probably never spent as much time at home as in 2020. What new have you learned about yourself during the pandemic? What has been a positive lesson from being at home?
I've never spent so much time with Roger as I have in the last 10 months. Never in the whole of our married life. So that was a big thing to start with. I mean, it was huge, wasn't it, Rod?
Absolutely. I think for both of us. And I think something that as two traveling professionals, because Jessica travels as much as I have, we've both had to learn that going off and doing what we were good at and what we enjoyed doing was very positive, but could be subconsciously treated as an escape from certain things that need nourishing when you get back home. And so, of course, spending 24 hours of the day, 7 days a week together has been an enlightening challenge, shall I say.
It's been very instructive. It's actually been very positive. And I was saying the other day, well, it's been great, actually. I mean, it's been everything, really. But I said the other day to Roger that, what was it I said? That if we spent this long together in this sort of unrelieved proximity, then certainly I felt that I could get on with anybody. You know, I've had to learn how to get on with Roger the whole time. Mm-hmm. You know, it reminded me that when you were away and when I was away, Dima, I don't know whether you found this, is that you exist in a funny way on a romantic level because you're away. So I miss you, as it were. And then when you come home, did you put the dustbins out? You know,
you're confronted by the reality.
You're confronted by the reality, the spinach and the heat,
the laundry and stuff. Also, of course, at other times, I mean, I remember, you know, when you're the one away and the other one is at home, and maybe you're the other side of the world, so you're on a different time zone. I remember a particular phone call when I called up and said, "Hello, how are you?" And it was about probably 11 o'clock at night, and Jessica said, "How dare you be so cheerful? You know, I've still got to put the laundry away. I've got to check that William has done his homework, and I've got to make an Easter bonnet for Laura's class tomorrow." You know, so actually,
I was really cross.
I can imagine. I offer. Go ahead.
No, Dean, I think you were going to say roughly the same, but in terms of actually, you talk about the traveling, it made me think that my job actually had great stresses involved with being away and the traveling, which I loved in many respects. You still had to come back to your desk. And the work never stopped, so you would always come back to a backlog, even a day's backlog. There would be the stress of well, I always found it stressful, you know, when it would get very windy, the weather would be disgusting, and I think, oh crumbs, have I got to travel in that awful weather? What am I going to take? Is it going to be, there's always a subliminal stress, always, always, always. So when that came to an end, it gradually able to shed that stress, and to become more of a real person, if you like. I mean, I was a real person before, but actually a living, breathing person rather than a wispy, grey shadow of a person.
In a similar way, I found the the removing of deadlines actually became a great relief. And and of course with the beginning of lockdown coinciding with such fantastic weather, and well, most of lockdown, it was a real gift because one had time. Some of those days just seemed to go on forever. And you had time to look at the surroundings, to walk around the streets around you, notice buildings you'd never even seen, look at the gardens, look at the flowers and stuff growing. Just be aware of the bits that normally you don't have time to see except in a car going to the airport or whatever. I think too, I mean, we jumped straight in as to how the lockdown affects as a couple. And of course, we've also, I think, both had to confront and work out what our own personal resources are. I mean, everybody is thrown back as an individual. And in my case, working out what happens when you as a performer, your whole life is identified with that performance and this music that you are so committed to, and what happens when actually those performances that are the sort of real adrenaline pumps are no longer there, and how much do you miss it? In my case, I've always had a kind of dual relationship to it. I always felt very confident about myself as a performer, less about, as it were, the business side, the promotion side, the creating and nurturing a career. That's always been harder work for one reason or another, and temperamentally. So I was very glad to not have to worry about those things, though of course missed getting on stage and performing to the public.
Yeah, I think for all of us, it's been a big adjustment, and it couldn't be, some of the results of the adjustment couldn't have been predicted before, because soon after that, before I did anything online, Roger, you decided to start this, long distance leader cycle, which has been a wonderful. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that was a direct reaction to and quite quickly after the lockdown.
Yes, it emerged initially from an idea that I wanted to present something to a couple of places that I would have been performing, and I got in touch. The first one was with the wonderful tenor Michael Spires, and we should have been at Brussels. And I said to him, can we record one song and present it as our apology or whatever, and he sang wonderfully, and the thing worked very well. And so then I just kind of had the idea. It was when Jessica and I were walking around the streets one morning. I said, what about a series called Lockdown Leader, was what I was going to call it, and then Long Distance Leader, so that in case lockdown stopped, I could still be. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the most fascinating thing about it was that it was doing everything backwards, because I was recording the piano part, and then the singer was having to fit with me, rather than what my whole life has been, which is me fitting with the singer. And it was actually an incredibly instructive business, because actually it revealed two things. One, it revealed how, in fact, the piano part is the structure of a song, and how very often, if the structure of the song is strong enough, it is the singer that, in a sense, rides on it. But the other thing I learned was, and this was really an interesting surprise, when I recorded the piano part, I was always thinking of the voice of the singer singing, but very often I actually instinctively played too fast through I didn't allow nearly as much as I thought I was allowing for the time for the singer to breathe or to enunciate a particular word. And in fact, in that first recording with Michael Spires that we did, we came completely apart for a couple of beats and were never able to pull that particular bit together. But subsequently, I learned I needed to listen to it and sing to my own accompaniment and work out where I was not following myself, if you see what I mean. And so it was actually an illustration I would never have discovered without actually going through that process.
That's wonderful to
It was
know.
an interesting. Sorry, Dean. I was just going to say that listening to Roger discuss it, and we talked about it quite a lot between ourselves, was, do you in putting the repertoire together, was it important to try and to capture a sense of what we were going through being locked down? Is it about long distance? Is it because the audience is long distance? Is it because the songs are about long distance love or love in the time of conflict? What does it reflect? And that was certainly one of the things that Roger, you had to balance, just as much as balancing which voice followed which voice and getting a contrast there. Did it have to be relevant, or should it have been a diversion? No, it's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. In the end, I tried to get a kind of balance, and I mean, there were some songs, for instance, the second of the whole series was Schubert Liebesbotschaft. So it was a message to a distant beloved, and in this case, consigned to a stream. A live stream, perhaps? Anyway, I'm sorry. Sorry. Another one, very, very successful, with which Louise Alder, this fantastic soprano, did a beautiful video of. It looks wonderful as well as sounding wonderful, was Richard Strauss's Morgen, which is a song about being allowed to meet and actually sort of be silent together on a beach somewhere, to meet the person you love. And that felt like a very strong message, which is, and of course, it's always very, it's very special in live performance as a classical musician, where we're dealing with music which was written 100 years ago or whatever. Every now and then we're given the opportunity, if you like, the privilege of performing a piece and there actually being a topical reference to it, which gives it a completely new relevance and depth. I mean, like a completely different example. At the height of the Falklands War, I did played a program at the Vignor Hall called The Sea. And there were references not particularly to sea warfare, but it still was very obviously there was a connection there. And on another occasion, and this could be very relevant to where we are now. I remember at the height of the Tiananmen Square crisis, I was playing a concert in Hong Kong with Kirita Kanawa. And at the end, we'd wondered what to do for an encore. And one of our supply of encores was an arrangement I'd done somewhere from West Side Story. And suddenly on an impulse, I said to Kiri, let's do Somewhere. And, you know, there's a place for us, somewhere a place. And there were all those students on Tiananmen Square. And it was just an extraordinary thing to have the opportunity to do. And a lot of the performances that have been given online during the pandemic have had so much extra resonance because they have connected with the experience that both musicians and listeners have been having.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, just to say, one of the videos I remember watching in early April, I suppose it was. I think it was the opera, the ballet, the National in Lyon. So the ballet of Lyon, and it was, I think it was Romeo and Juliet. I can't remember. I think it was Romeo and Juliet. But they were all filmed. They filmed themselves practicing dancing in their apartments. Exactly. And it extraordinary. It was, but I think maybe because it wasn't music, you know, because they weren't instrumentalists, it was doubly sort of exciting. I love that. But do you remember? It was quite
yes,
and touching, so touching.
I think what's remarkable during the pandemic was on one hand, we were all locked in and we were not allowed as performers to perform for live audience. On the other hand, what it did also, and what you were saying, it just emphasized the timelessness and the time travel of music. You know, there's absolutely no borders for music, not only geographically. Of course, now we have those things like computers and Zoom and so forth, but those are just technical things. They all existed before any of this technical progress, because the minute you start, performing Schubert's song, you are transported to the first quarter of the 19th century in some ways. And at the same time, it could have another connection to what influenced Schubert. So it's a time and culture and geographical travel like no other, with words sometimes, but often without words. And that's why the importance of that connection with no common language, with no regard to age or race or religious beliefs. It's just something that's there, and it became even more important to us, I think, than it was before. So that was an interesting sort of the juxtaposition. On one hand, our wings were absolutely practically were completely clipped. You know, we were in the cage, but we managed to sing from those cages and connect much more than we were able to connect actually before that, because we would go to this place, perform for them, and then to the other one. All of a sudden, the world could be watching and connecting and relating, because we're all in the same rather difficult and with no end in sight yet situation. Now there is fortunately hope with vaccine and all that. So let's just take a little more look at your both careers. And we talked to Roger. Let me ask Jessica, because there is a question. You have worked with many great conductors, instrumentalists, and even stage directors. Is there a difference of approach to those professions, or is it more depends on their artist's personality?
Oh, I think it always depends on the artist's personality. Always. Conductors, in a sense, have a bigger, not more important, but a bigger career, because you're working with an orchestra. You're working just on a bigger scale. they don't have run-in recitals, you know, so which very often are local. So you're always working on a bigger picture, if you like. Yes, of course, you can run in the program in a less high-profile city, so you have that. But again, it's just a question of scale. So an instrumentalist, it's you know, the nitty-gritty. There's more nitty-gritty, perhaps. But for both require a strategy, a plan to their career. You think in 5-year blocks or 10-year, you know, whatever is relevant to that particular artist. So that you always have to have a structure. You're planning. You'll talk about it the same with a conductor and an instrumentalist. The plan, the strategy would always be mutually agreed. So there's a similarity. You, of course, would be working with different people very often, though if, you know, you're talking to the Musikverein, I would be talking to Dr. Angian both about a soloist as well as a conductor. So, of course, there you have the overlapping. But you bring the same, you bring very much the same qualities to your work for a conductor as to an instrumentalist, which are incalculable, I mean, just so important, which is integrity, the importance of relationships, empathy with the artist and what they're doing, their dreams. You're dealing with people's dreams when you're a manager. You're not just helping them pay their mortgage, you're helping them realize their dreams, which sometimes is what used to keep me awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, it's a huge responsibility. So you have that, which is common to both. Looking after a stage director felt very different to me. And actually, when I looked after Jonathan Miller, it was actually like having a day off, because, you know, well, apart from the fact that he was just so funny and so gifted in so many different fields, but he, you know, I'd be working in a different medium. I'd be working, in a sense, with words, with text, and it wasn't, you know, a sonata in B flat minor, or God forbid, B major and I got it wrong. You know, it would be a different sort of dimension. Completely fascinating. I loved it. And the result would be different. And because I was much less experienced working in the theatre, the result would be sometimes I would be completely transported, but in a different way to how I ever was in a concert hall, just because, as I said, it would almost be like having a day off. Similarities again, you know, contracts was slightly different, but would inform each other, which is what I found interesting. There's a time difference in a theatrical contract.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fascinating, I have to say, and it was so enriching.
Let me ask you, is it a coincidence that you actually never worked for a singer?
Well, yes and no.
Married to Roger.
I think it's been hard working for singers being married to Roger.
Yeah.
I think you also recognize that there was something of a minefield that you would rather not step into.
I think probably. But I was a cellist, Dima. And, you know, I worked professionally as a cellist for 4 or 5 years. And actually that was my training. Song, I learned so much about song being married to Roger and, you know, being friends with many of the artists he worked with. And that was a joy. It was different and I kept it different.
Absolutely. There was also a question here. How does one, because you started as a cellist, and how does one become an agent? Could you share your journey from being a player to becoming a top agent?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I think there came a point when I realized that I was never going to be able to play at the level that I wanted consistently to play at. I think I had a dread of sitting at the back of an orchestra and nobody would really notice if I'd gone home. And I was not very good at that. I sort of wanted to sit on the front desk, you know. So recognizing that in myself, I thought maybe I'm not quite cut out for this. So I moved sideways, and I first worked at the Aldeburgh Festival, which was great. And in fact, I did manage the singing courses on behalf of Peter Pears. So I did have quite a lot of contact with singers. And that was fascinating. And then from there, when I went back to London, the next couple of stages, I think, were complete. You know, I was in the happenstance. I was in the right place at the right time. Maybe being bossy and organising, I thought I might have a chance to be able to work in this side of the business.
Have the right qualifications, yeah.
Well, maybe.
I remember.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just remember when I got married. Howard Hartog, who ran Ingpen and Williams, who had just become my agent, he said to me, "Roger, you know now you are married to a professional liar, crook, and thief." Which is clearly how he estimated his own actions as an agent, which is quite fun. But
sorry, just to say then very quickly, my career path then was by being, I suppose, quite good at what I did and being noticed, and then being invited to join the various agencies I worked for. IMG came from my working with Stephen Wright at Harold Holt.
That's how we met.
From IMG, then being invited by Stephen Lumsden to join Into Musica. But my actual work, sorry, Roger, my actual work first in an agency, which at that point was Harrison Parrott, was doing the servicing. So doing the logistics, and I was covering maternity leave or sick leave or something. So I spent some 3 or 4 or 5 months doing the servicing for artists. And then from there moved over into what became the managing of artists. I mean, do you know what I'm making is the distinction between just being an agent and a manager. I mean, you're both. But the managing side is really what you do. You manage, you look after. It's interesting that in the vernacular, we talk about looking after artists. Place. Exactly. But the managing is actually what's important.
Well, I think so, and it's interesting because last week my last guest was the distinguished Russian composer Alexander Raskatov, and we talked about the relationship between the publishers and composers, and how important that link, human link, you know, and because it's not just to get you the next commission or to, you know, to make sure that your music is well distributed. It's actually find the right project for you, for that particular composer. And that, you know, the same thing as for a manager to make sure that the debut is made with, if it's an instrumentalist, with the right conductor or with the right pianist or with the right collaborator, the chamber music, the repertoire, choice of the repertoire would be. And what I used to, you know, what I used to give several examples from my life when I would have to turn down like a debut in Paris. I remember Michel Glotz, who was my French agent, and he offered me Beethoven concerto to play in Paris. At that point, I must have just played it once or twice. It was a new concerto, and I turned it down. And he couldn't believe, but he had ultimately respect for me. I said, Michel, I love that concerto. And as it turned out to be maybe one of my very best concerto, but 20 years later or to 15 years later. But at that point, I just felt that it's very presumptuous of me to come to Paris at the age of, I don't know, 25 or something, and play maybe the Everest of the repertoire. So I waited until the next year. I came and played Tchaikovsky, which was a lot closer to sort of where I lived at that point. Now it might be the other way around, but it's just as important. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I always thought that for any age, but especially as you are young, it's just as important to say no as it is important to say yes and be ready for any kind of jump in.
Definitely yes. Definitely yes.
Yeah. That's also sorry. That's also very, very important when dealing with singers. Because it can so easily happen that a young voice is, a young singer has obviously got talent. They're obviously going somewhere, and so an opera company bags them or wants to bag them for a particular role, but it's not necessarily the one they're absolutely ready to sing. They need another 3 years or something till the voice is absolutely right for it. And having the courage to say no to what feels like a life-changing opportunity, that I think is where a good manager is absolutely essential, because as musicians, we can feel very isolated. Every performer is bound to have great insecurity about where their profession is, where their career is going to go. And every offer that you're given is a great sort of Christmas present, but every now and then it isn't the right one. And you need support from somebody who you trust to say, hang on, you'll get it. They'll ask you again if you say no. And that has so
that conviction and belief in the artist's uniqueness, because what always frightened me as a soloist, or sort of I was always aware, even though I ended up being represented by big agencies like IMG and also Columbia at the time and everything, I always felt, or remember even some of my colleagues as well, I work for Columbia Artists. I said, no, you don't work. Columbia Artists actually works for you. It's the other way around. When you have this giant, and look at them now, they're no longer existing at the, they folded during the pandemic. But at that time, IMG or ICM at the time so we work for the same company. So no, they work for us. You see, this whole thing is very sort of, it gets very twisted. But at the same time, the most successful careers that I know of among my colleagues always come from extremely good, unbreakable trust of the agent, to your agent's opinion, because you might be having a wonderful success and great, but the agent said, listen, I don't think actually this repertoire for you is ideal, or maybe you shouldn't be playing with this conductor, he doesn't, whichever it might be. And next time, and as long as you have that sort of unshakable belief, that trust between, I think that makes usually for a very, very successful careers, don't you think?
Definitely. But the trust works not only between artist and agent manager, but also between the agent manager and the outside world.
Exactly. So
you have to, the people I worked with in the Orchestre de Paris or the London Symphony, they have to trust you. Exactly. And they trust that when you're suggesting somebody, you're not offloading them with a lot of nonsense and substandard stuff.
Exactly.
In the course of daily work, let alone when there's a cancellation. In a sense, that's the really sharp end of what we're talking about, is that the LSO will need a conductor for next week, and you do have somebody who's free, but actually it isn't the right repertoire. They will have just come in from New York before the first rehearsal, whatever mitigating circumstances they are, and you'll say, I'm sorry, but actually it's not the right time, or it's not the right moment, or I'm afraid they actually are not free. I'm terribly sorry. not free.
Mm.
But you have to do that, and then the orchestra has to know that you're saying it with for the right reasons, in the way that you're saying for the right reasons, that somebody is free, that they may not particularly know about, but who you know will do a fantastic job. So of trust, for me, always, integrity I mentioned already, but it's this element of trust was, I think, the foundation, is the foundation of our work. My responsibility was always to the artists that I and the company managed. So there would be times actually during cancellations when none of our artists were free.
Mm.
And it would be then that I would say, well, actually, you could look at so-and-so.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So your first duty is to your artists, your family of artists, both in the smaller scale, your own individual ones, and your colleagues. And in fact, one of the fantastic things about Intermusica is how closely we all work together. And if none of my artists were free to fill the LSO job, I would talk to my colleagues and say, have you got somebody? And any cancellation that came in would go to the company, which wasn't unique to Intermusica, but you work as a group. And in that lies the support, obviously, and the network which supported all of the agents was fantastic, essential, actually.
I think that builds also the trust on the other side. I mean, next time they will most likely ask an agent like you, who they know would be honest and would be just as as conscious of the situation you put an orchestra or that organization by pushing an artist, maybe even with a name that would be wrong for that repertoire, or would be coming with a jet lag and all of that. That's not often happens, of course, because in the past, of course, we know the big, especially in US, you have those traveling selling agents, and they come in and they present a list, and it's sort of like traveling shoe salesmen. I mean, as long as you buy shoes from that company, that would be fine. Oh, this one is not good. Okay, so we've got that. That's too expensive. Okay, we've got a less expensive. Just as long as you buy, our agent. But that's a very sort of wholesale kind of approach. I think much more the careers are not built that way. It's just keeping the total turnover. But those days, in any case, I hope they're over, and especially now with the pandemic, it should be. Let me turn to Roger for a minute, and there is an interesting question. This one: what are the biggest misconceptions people have about collaborative pianists with singers or playing with instrumental soloists? Are there different skills or sensitivities needed when playing with singers as opposed to instrumentalists?
The short answer is yes, hugely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to accompany singers, you need to first, you need to actually understand how they work, how not just how voices work, but how the mentality works. And of course, you have to know and understand the repertoire, which includes the understanding of the texts involved. Both activities are chamber music, both are collaborations, and at their best are equal input from both sides, but you have this crucial extra element with song, which is the text and the words. Now, one of the misconceptions, I think, between playing songs and playing, for instance, Beethoven sonatas or instrumental sonatas, for instance, is because of the way things go, violinists tend to play, for instance, with, quote, real pianists, unquote, rather than with song accompanists. And, the piano parts, they're really difficult. They have very strong technical sides to them. And you get a you can get a very good musical marriage that way. So there is a conception that, you know, it's two soloists working together. Whereas if you're accompanying a singer, you're a kind of yes man doing what the singer wants you to do. Now, in fact, in the actual playing of the music, there's far more autonomy in playing songs than there is playing a piece of chamber music. In a piece of chamber music, if you decide you want to play this particular set of semiquavers in a different way with a different articulation, then you've, as you were, got to have a little committee meeting with your partner just to check that they're comfortable with that phrasing. Whereas the piano parts of songs are, in a sense, much more independent and the way the voice and the piano interact is much less kind of, as it were, parallel than a violin and a piano. And so actually we have much more autonomy to follow our fantasy, follow our instinct. And I mean, that's okay, that's how I would put it. And of course,
very good.
You know, the poetry is what fills the imagination.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful to hear from you. And of course, you know, in my family, every member of my family that's here in London has worked with you. Susan Roberts and Julia, of course, made her wonderful recording with you, the Rachmaninoff songs. And of course, you and I have been playing over the years, you know, sonata recitals and all kinds of things, and Chrysler transcriptions, or the program that we did for Chrysler and Rachmaninoff. And it's always, for me, it's always a special treat to play with somebody like you. I don't want just to, you know, to give you compliments, but I think you're absolutely right that if you look at the top echelon of piano soloists, first of all, some of them are really not even interested in collaborating. They're just soloists. Then there's another one that do it because now everybody plays chamber music and it's good to pair them, especially at festivals. And even when they're good at sort of duo situation, if you put a song cycle in front of them, they wouldn't know what to do. You know, or forget the song cycle. If you put a Chrysler piece at the end of a sonata recital, they would not be able to manage it because that's a completely different set of skills. And then, of course, the whole song repertoire and everything. So I think in a way, it's sort of like I once was told with a great deal of proof that actually an opera conductor who starts an opera, especially as a you know, co-repetitor, as they say, you know, first you know, playing for that, he can basically conduct anything. He can learn and he can grow into a symphonic conductor, or he can certainly accompany anyone, you know, any instrument, because he's already wired that way. But the ones who sort of turn, you know, like myself, from being a soloist into conducting, and you conduct symphony, when it comes to opera or when it comes to accompany different, you know, singers, that's a whole other ball game. And you have to learn a lot of new skills that you automatically learn an accompanist in an opera house, or, you know, by doing so. It's a lot more skills involved, I think, in this. And now, just to change the gears again, so we don't go just one direction, there is a question to Jessica. Is it necessary nowadays, especially during these pandemic times, to have what they call a portfolio career?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's a way in which I believe no, because to be a really top artist, you're a bit like an elite athlete. and you know, you have to concentrate on perfecting your skills.
What you're best at.
Yeah, of course.
And what you're best at. But I think any artist has to be broad in outlook. They have to have a wide range of references and interest, and they have to know what, in a sense, where anything comes from. And particularly now, to answer your question, I think you've got to be very nimble now. I think you have to be versatile. I think you have to be adaptable. So those qualities, I think, have been brought to the fore during the pandemic. I think the people that will do well afterwards are going to be, and institutions that will do well are those that have those qualities, that are nimble, that are flexible, that are, you know, their sights are set wide. But as to be a really great, you know, and to play at the highest level, you can't let up. It's really quite interesting. Sometimes I used to think, if I look at the list of artists I managed, could I imagine any of them doing anything else? Yeah, okay, I could, but I just knew that this is what they did. So that's one answer. I think the other answer is, yes, possibly you do have to bring in to be able to use other of your skills. Because, you know, the days have gone, not only as a performing musician, but you don't go and, you know, our children don't expect to be working in their professions now in 50 years' time. You know, gone are the days of one single career path.
I think there is a danger for all musicians to feel that there is no life outside music. And as a performer, it is so important to you that you can fall into a trap where, well, that's exactly what you think. There's no life after music. And the danger is that also can create actually a blinkered attitude to performance and actually narrow the vision of what you actually offer. And it's, you know, one of the singers I worked with, Florian Boesch, wonderful Austrian baritone, he said to me, you know, it's so important to cultivate the Nebenwelt, which means the side world. You know, he's a very good example because he has a workshop and a house in the country, and he'll spend as much time fiddling around with bits of wood and lathes and so on, or planting an orchard or something, as actually on the stage singing. And in a sense, all those extra experiences that we bring to the music have to, I think, feed the music itself. And one of the great, going back to your original question about the lockdown, one of the great gifts has just been having the time to connect with what you could just call real life, the stuff of life that everybody is in contact with, rather than just this narrow world of music.
Agree. I absolutely agree. So if you think, the theatrical world, sorry, Dima, just to finish, the theatrical world has always required that their actors also be something else because of the, I don't know whether it's volatility or it's whether the booking process is different. So many is the actor who will also either wait at tables or do bits of coaching or be a taxi driver, you know. Thankfully, musicians haven't had to do that in the same way, but I do think, as Roger has said, well, as I said, I think you have to have a very broad vision. I'm not going to repeat myself.
Go back to the question. Sorry, Dima. Just going back to the question of the portfolio career.
Yeah.
I think I remember Roger Norrington, the conductor. He was a very, very good singer. He was a tenor and a strong and characterful singer. And when he absolutely started out, he was singing and he was conducting. He said, I remember he told me, somebody said to him, you know, Roger, if you go on like this, people won't know which you are and they will undervalue you as both. You have to decide which one you want them to buy. And he became a wonderful conductor. And I think that is an important issue. But of course, you know, instrumentalists can play chamber music and maintain, you know, can be very broad in the number of things they do and still be themselves.
Yeah. I think there's also a change of this in the pandemic. For me, anyway, it's been an interesting restructuring. I don't know, reinvention or not. Well, in many ways, I have reinvented also my modus operandi, because I've always known long in advance what I'm going to do, the plan of learning pieces as violinist, as conductor, as transcriber, as everything was sort of, you know, trying to catch up and being in this constant flow, preparing for the next performance. And every performance, as I used to say, was a general rehearsal for the next performance. Now that's gone. And maybe in a few months, it will come back, one hopes, but there's no guarantee of that. Now, to sort of rewheel my whole life, I mean, I've been on those tracks for 40 years, pretty, you know, that's not an easy task. But what saves one, in my case, because I always had much wider interest than just being on stage as the soloist you have to have. If I don't play as a soloist, life doesn't exist. If they don't hear my sound in the Beethoven or Brahms or whatever, it's a catastrophe. Besides, what I've learned, but along the way, that I could actually rejoice of my past. That not only the future, because it's such a, you know, such an ephemeral thing. What we have, we cannot change our past. We can only interpret it in a different way. We can look at it positively or negatively, but we cannot change it. Also, we have not as much influence on our future. We think we can, but as this pandemic proves to us, no, we can't predict it, and we can't really influence. So the only thing we have relatively, you know, strong position is actually present. At this point, we're talking about now. So I don't plan anything more than a week ahead of my life, and I know that next week will be very similar to this week, with some differences, and I put whatever, you know, task I need to accomplish. So what it changed the egocentric part of being a performer, and we all egocentrics to a degree. You know, I get a lot more pleasure of you know, discovering somebody else or inspiring or getting somebody out of depression and making sure that they actually hold on and they have their hopes up and they can perform. And I've discovered teaching, which I never had the time. I never thought I would be interested in teaching. So there's a whole lot of deep changes in one's mentality. And if you are only thinking that there's only one most elevated way of life is being there on stage, and you're so much dependent on those applause, I get a lot, believe me, just as much, you know, or satisfaction of one, doing my transcriptions, two, of doing distant recording and actually seeing what a difference it makes with my colleagues who are so involved and who do it just as passionately as me, it gives me a great satisfaction. So I think it does have, hopefully, long-term effects on all of us, on our sort of mentality, because you know, soloists and singers and conductors especially, you know, such ego trip, you know, playing God, you know, you don't produce any sound, yet every sound depends on you, you know, that's a huge. And I think the role of the conductor has been especially inflated in the 20th century, because they became the heroes, they became the gods of our profession, where in fact they don't really not worth all that much without the composers, and the connection with composers being somehow lost to a great degree in the 20th century. So instead of the composer being the focal point, the one who actually creates the sounds we reproduce, you know, it became that, you know, godlike, you know, Karajan-like, you know, figure of omnipotent, you know, conductor. I think that's been greatly, you know, sort of undermined in the positive sense, because they are the ones who really cannot conduct, you know, whatever. Please.
Yeah, can I mention in that context, and for instance, your work with the NES, with your orchestra, with your transcriptions and so on, when one watches those videos, where one of the things that struck me is, and Jessica talked earlier on about being the back desk of the cellos and nobody noticing whether you're there or not. Now, it's totally democratic. Your orchestra, every single player is in some way spotlit, whether they're the back desk of the cello or the, you know, whether they're front or back, and you can see a completely equal enjoyment and involvement. And no audience member who has ever gone to a concert will have seen an orchestra like that. They will never have actually been able to witness the expression, the concentration of each individual player, and to respect how good those people are and how hard they work. It's like every member of the corps de ballet at the Royal Ballet.
Exactly.
And I also think that, just taking back to myself for a moment, one of the things that surprised me when I did my long distance leader, which has me on one side and the singer on the other, and we're in split screen, is how much people say, I even like it better than the real thing, you know. And the only reason I can think of that, and they tend to be friends of mine, so, but is that as the pianist in this particular case, I am not in the background looking at the side wall of the concert hall, but they are actually much closer, and I have invited them into my space.
Exactly.
So it does actually show more the sort of equal contribution of both pianist and singer, and it's more inviting in that sense, and there's less of a kind of formal barrier, and that's something that you couldn't do except on the internet with the technology involved.
Exactly, and one cannot say, oh well, who looks at it? Hundreds of thousands of people actually have been watching that, and you know, in order to be heard by the same amount of people in real life, you need tens, if not hundreds, of performances, you know, to be heard at just as many people. So it's not an illusion, and the people do express themselves, and I think the whole era of you know, singers coming out, and then a pianist after a certain 10 seconds, just sheepishly coming to the piano. I mean, try to do it now. When Sir Antonio Papano is at the piano, it's certainly not going to work like that. Or I played with Wolfgang Zawalisch as a pianist. I mean, you're not going to do those numbers without. That's changed a great deal, and that democratization of the arts, I think, has been incredibly important. There's a related question here, if I could pose that to you. What do you believe is the role of the performer after 2020? Is it to entertain or to educate, to present new or old works? Has the relationship between the composer and performer changed since the Beethoven times or Shostakovich times, in your opinion? Jessica, you start, and then Roger.
I think the question of entertaining your audience or educating is an interesting one. I remember a talk that Ivan Fischer gave, who I have such an admiration for. And talk about being diverse, goodness me, and nimble and everything. The work he does is amazing. He remarked, and this was way back when I think the Berlin Wall was teaching, that the audiences in the East went to a concert to listen seriously and to be educated and to participate, whereas the way in which the audiences in the West were being encouraged to be entertained. So I think he certainly then felt, and I would imagine now, is that to be entertained in performance is a superficial approach. Whereas actually I would say also that true performance incorporates many different elements. So yes, one should be entertained, but you should also be educated, and you as a member of the audience should actually work quite hard and at what you're listening to. So I think it really does need to be a combination of various elements. What was the rest of it, Dean? Sorry.
Yeah, well, the relationship between the composer and performer. Let Roger take over, and then we might add something. What's your opinion, Roger?
Well, I think, as Jessica said, it's a combination of certainly of both entertaining and educating. I mean, educating in a way is too serious a word, inform, but ideally, when you start a piece of music, you hook the ears of the audience, you hook their imagination, and you take them with you somewhere, and you take them hopefully somewhere they've never been before. And if it's music they know, they have the comforting experience of a familiar landscape with a slightly different light on it. If it's music they don't know, then you've taken them to a new country. And that is always my sort of goal. And as I've sometimes said to my students, what happens when you play a song? You're not just entertaining, you're not just playing the notes, and you're not in an exam. You're hooking your listeners and you're saying, come with me. And that's very important. The other part of your question, the relationship between the composer and performer, it depends how you are kind of framing that. If you mean how the performer reads the composer, I mean, we have examples of like the early music movement, which as a kind of reaction to the von Karajan approach to playing Mozart or Bach or whatever, encouraged by more historical performance. There's probably a kind of trajectory after any composer's life. Gradually, a tradition builds up as to how their music is performed, and it's either, it can become too entrenched and it can become a caricature. And then somebody comes along and has another look at the score and thinks in a different way, and then it gets cleaned up and it gets closer. But in my mind, the duty of a performer is to just read the score and understand why the composer has actually written the notes they have, as far as you can. And actually, which takes me for a moment back to your question about playing songs and playing instrumental music.
Right.
I think it's a shame, in a way, that pianists tend to be divided and specialize on either one or the other. Because in my experience, I have learned so much about why composers who write songs, why they choose a particular modulation, what that is meaning, how you color that to emphasize the meaning. And then you find similar things in the instrumental music, where your experience of them as a song composer helps you know how to color, how to phrase these modulations, which as if you're a musician with no knowledge of the vocal side of the literary background. I mean, for instance, playing Schumann or something. I mean, Schumann was such a literary composer. Brahms, for instance, Brahms's songs, the harmonic direction that a line will take is intimately connected with the emotion of the words. And I find exactly the same things happening in the violin sonatas or the other chamber music. And one's imagination, one's oral imagination, one's sense of color is so affected by that. And I think therefore one feeds the other.
That's great. I just want to read something that would be, I think, nice to know from three of us. It's from Concertos Augusto. You'll know that it comes from Gonzalo. It says, no questions, just to say that I worked with the three of you and you're wonderful professionals in every one of your fields. Lucky me, big hugs. And lucky us that have known Gonzalo for all these years and still having a project coming up in these dark times. I'm still hoping to get to Spain, where actually concerts been going on a lot more than in Europe. So big hug from us to Gonzalo.
Yeah.
Yes. Stay safe and
go on.
hopefully we'll be able to see each other soon. Now, very important question before I let you go. What's the best way for the young performers to be heard and noticed today? Is it still competitions, auditions, or now more online material like website, YouTube, etc.? Who wants?
I think it's all of it. I think it's all of it. I really do. I think the first thing is you've got to be very, very good, because there's so many good artists and young artists that are at a serious disadvantage at the moment unless they've already got a step in the door. You have to be distinctive, and what makes a young artist distinctive? It'll be the quality of their playing, the intelligence they bring to bear on their playing. Again, back to being nimble and versatile. And I think those qualities will embrace the various avenues that you were just mentioning. So yes, a lively online presence with interesting material. But I do think, I have to say, in a way, I'm sorry to say, that competitions do make a big difference in how, as an agent manager, you can sell. But you can be the second prize winner. You don't have to be the prize winner. I think to be realistic, it may not confer a huge distinction on the artist, but I think it is a useful tool, actually. I would always recommend that a young artist is ready and willing to play for a conductor, to do an audition, get themselves off for coaching with Roger, as it were, or to see you, or if they're interested in transcription, to come and see you, or to come, you know, to choose what element it is in an artist that they feel that they can relate to, and to go and seek advice and to gain experience. I think studying abroad, you know, if you're, studying abroad, go to the States if you're European. If you're American, come to Europe. Go to Europe, please.
Yes, in the meantime, crossing the invisible, now quite visible, divide into Europe. The other day, I had to fill out a form for the first time ever, you know, by just sending a letter. I was actually sending, somebody asked to send, imagine people still collecting photographs with signatures. So I handed this envelope, and because it was going to Germany, I had to fill out the content and everything for the border control. Now this is news. From a letter from London to Germany, you had to fill out the. Just seems so strange, isn't it? Yeah, but you're right about I think all of this, and I think what this pandemic has done, I feel that I've been a lot more available because of the time, and because I'm no longer a moving target, which I have been for decades. You know, it would be very difficult to pin me down. And actually, unless you come to concerts or master classes or whatever I was doing, you know, you wouldn't be able to. Now, anybody could be having a conversation like we're having now. We're having it online, but it could be just two people having, you know, kind of a clinic, masterclass discussion, looking at the scores, you know, having a private lesson, or just, you know, discussion on how does one do play conduct if you've never done play conduct. And it could be very famous artists who've never done it. It's possible. I am a lot more reachable. I think young people should not hesitate to find a way. They do know all these social media better than our generation, but you know, they should contact people like us in our, you know, the older generation, just with advice, or to send something to listen to, or, you know, just the sort of a, we have become, I for one certainly have become kind of life coaches, you know, because of the experience, because of all those things. How does one do this, and how does one do that? And I think that's actually the best way to learn. And that brings us maybe to the last question that I will ask you, is the relationship of, let's say, between the formal institution, like Roger, you teach at Royal College and everything, but there is an opinion that being in college, you have a certain bubble, sort of a educational bubble, which is quite different from real life. What's your opinion? I'll start with Roger. You know, whether it's a bubble that needs to be overcome, or it's a welcome bubble, as one of the previous guests said. Well, it depends where you come from. You know, before it could be a welcome bubble. What's your opinion on that?
Well, a music college works in different ways. You go there to study with a particular teacher. You go there to learn to do what you're, you know, to be as good at what you're doing as possible. It's an opportunity to meet with your peers. It's an opportunity to compare yourself with your peers and raise your own standard. But it's also, it is true, institutions create their own atmosphere, as it were. I've got to be careful, my iPad's about to run out. real life, when you get out the other side, can be very different. And sometimes the people who are encouraged in an institution and maybe win all the prizes are not always the people who will finally get there once they've got into the big wide world, and it can produce unrealistic expectations. So one of the very important things for any would-be performer is to try and get as realistic an idea of what their abilities are and where their strengths lie. And then, as you suggest, find who can help build up the things that perhaps they're less good at, but that they need. I wouldn't abandon the music colleges for a moment, but I would also say, after you've been to college, seek out somebody who you really think can help you. I mean, the biggest influence on my whole musical life and career was Paul Hamburger, who I went to study with after I'd finished at the Royal College, and I learnt with him privately over 2 or 3 years, and he really taught me the basis of everything that I have learnt since. So, and of course, it's a cliche to say it, as musicians and artists, we never stop learning for the whole of our lives.
Oh God, I remember Maris Janssen's going to sit in rehearsals till he died. I mean, Dime, you'll remember this too, but I remember him going to listen to Sonata at the Concertgebouw. He was in Amsterdam. He would ask me to arrange, ask whether he could just sit in on whoever was conducting. He never stopped learning.
He never stopped learning, and that's why his career was always going up. And I remember how he came to London, especially for a few days to attend a piano rehearsal for Otello with Tony Pappano, and I came with him both times, and that's how Sasha Antonenko remembers in the program which I did. He said, I come in just to one of the first rehearsals with Pappano, and I see Janssens and Sitkovetsky, and all of them with the scores, and this was just my piano rehearsal. So I was, but Maris was absolutely like a sponge. He always, and every time we talked, which would go for hours sometimes, he wanted to know everything about the music world, but also politics and football and cinema. And he always envied that I had more time than he did. He said, oh, you're so lucky, you know so much about this and so much. All I know is my scores. I always study my scores with Maris. I said, but I envy you because you know your scores like probably no one else alive. And because you spent decades studying the same pages, the same, and you know so many interpretations of everybody else, and then you've created. And so I know that it's been a life work of it. So he's a great example of somebody who never stopped learning. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And go ahead.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Go ahead.
This can continue what they're doing, which is, I think, to see that they are fully based within the musical community. And that bubble is porous.
Yeah.
And the influences can flow in, they can flow out. And that seems to me incredibly important. They can't exist in a vacuum. Can you have a bubble which is in a vacuum? They are within the music business and community. And I think that's essential. Performers go in, composers go in, conductors go in, students come out, they seek the sort of guidance we're talking about. It's got to be porous.
And develop your own voice, and never really try to go this way or that way. Just find sources of what you are. It will become clear with age and time, but you have to sort of develop. At first, you try everything, and then you actually narrow your repertoire. That's been my experience. At first, you just expand, and then you start narrowing things down because you realize this is the repertoire, or these are the pieces, or this is the activities where I feel I've got something unique to say. That's my voice, so to speak. And once you find your voice, I think sooner or later, if you've got the real quality, if you've got something to say, it will be heard. It will be heard by the people in the business, by your colleagues, by your older colleagues, and it will, because music does have a way of, as we said at the very beginning, it respects no borders. In a way, it's the opposite, but in that respect, similar to the virus. It just goes through all of those machines and all of those, and it just conquers, and it respects no boundaries. So in that respect, we're lucky, because we've got something, an alternative universe, and it's not the internet, it's actually the world of music that we are so lucky. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been a wonderful time spending, not only with dear friends, but also fantastic professionals. And I hope that our audience got something out of very important questions and answers, your answers that you've voiced. And I really, really thank you for that. In the meantime,
thank you, Dima.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye then.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.